Black delivery driver turns the tables on racist customer. Truth leaves them speechless. You have no right to be in this neighborhood. I've already called the police. Marcus Johnson stood rigid at the edge of the manicured lawn, the small package still clutched in his weathered hands. His delivery uniform was soaked with sweat from the summer heat, but a different kind of heat now burned in his chest. The elderly white woman on the porch pointed an accusatory finger at him, her face contorted with anger and fear. Ma'am, I'm just delivering your package. I don't care who you say you work for. People like you have been casing this neighborhood for weeks. I saw you looking at all the houses. Marcus felt the familiar knot forming in his stomach, the one that appeared whenever he encountered this particular kind of situation, one that at 62 years old he had experienced far too many times in his life. But this time was different. This time he had reached his breaking point. People like me? His voice was low, controlled, but carrying an intensity that made the woman take a step back. What exactly do you mean by that, Mrs. Whitman? Something flashed across the woman's face, surprise perhaps that he knew her name, but her expression quickly hardened again. How do you know my name? Have you been stalking me? Marcus reached slowly into his pocket, causing Mrs. Whitman to gasp and retreat further onto her porch. But he only pulled out his phone, found a specific photo, and held it up toward her. Take a good look at this picture, Mrs. Whitman. Do you recognize the man standing next to me? The elderly woman squinted at the screen, her face suddenly draining of color. Her hand flew to her mouth as recognition dawned, followed by utter confusion. That's my son Robert, but how do you? Marcus's voice was steady now, edged with a lifetime of dignity maintained in the face of indignity. You don't remember me, do you? But I think you're about to. But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when Marcus Johnson began what should have been an ordinary day. At 5:30 in the morning, Marcus's alarm clock played the opening notes of Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On?", a song that had been waking him for decades. His wife, Diane, was still asleep beside him, and he moved carefully to avoid disturbing her as he slipped out of bed. Their modest home in Westfield was quiet except for the distant purr of their aging refrigerator. Marcus had been driving for National Delivery Service for nearly 7 years now, ever since retiring from 30 years of teaching high school history. The pension wasn't enough, not with Diane's medical bills, and besides, he had never been one to sit still. Delivering packages kept him active, gave him purpose, and most days he enjoyed the solitude and the glimpses into different neighborhoods across the city. In the kitchen, he prepared his usual breakfast, 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, and black coffee, while listening to the morning news on the small radio that had occupied the same spot on the counter since 1985. The weatherman predicted temperatures in the mid-90s, and Marcus made a mental note to bring extra water bottles. You're up early, Diane said, appearing in the doorway in her blue bathrobe, the one he had given her for Christmas 3 years ago. Same time as always, Marcus replied with a smile, pulling out a chair for her. At 60, Diane's hair was fully silver now, but she moved with the same grace that had caught his eye at a community college dance in 1982. Don't forget we're having dinner at Tanya's tonight, she reminded him. She's making your favorite pot roast. Their daughter Tanya, at 38, had inherited her mother's cooking skills and her father's stubborn optimism. A lawyer with 2 children of her own, she insisted on weekly family dinners despite her hectic schedule. I remember, I should be done with my route by 4, home by 4:30. Marcus checked his watch, a Timex that had been with him since his teaching days. I'd better get moving. I have the Oakwood Heights route today. Diane's expression flickered. Oakwood Heights, be careful out there. They both knew what she meant. Oakwood Heights was an affluent, predominantly white neighborhood where delivery drivers, especially black delivery drivers, were often viewed with suspicion. Always am, he assured her, kissing her forehead before heading to the door. His NDS delivery van was parked in the driveway, the logo faded from years in the sun. Marcus had been driving the same van for so long that its quirks were as familiar to him as his own habits. The slight pull to the right, the way the air conditioning struggled after noon, the precise jiggle needed to unlock the back doors. At the distribution center, Marcus greeted the early morning staff with his usual warmth. Sarah Chen, the young operations manager, handed him his electronic scanner. Morning, Mr. Johnson. Full load today, Oakwood Heights and Riverdale. Morning, Sarah. How's the college applications coming along for your daughter? Sarah beamed. Jennifer got accepted to Howard. Your advice about the essay really helped. That's wonderful news. Howard's a great school. She'll do well there. Marcus had counseled countless students through college applications during his teaching years, and he still found himself mentoring young people whenever the opportunity arose. "Oh, and heads up, there's a new procedure for signature confirmations," Sarah added, showing him the updated protocol on the scanner. "Customer needs to be present, no exceptions." Marcus nodded, noting the change. "Got it. Anything else I should know?" "Just the usual summer warnings. Stay hydrated, take your breaks in the shade. It's going to be a scorcher today." Loading his van with packages of various sizes, Marcus organized them by delivery address, a system he had perfected over the years. By 7:30, he was on the road, the morning sun already warming the asphalt. His first stops in Riverdale went smoothly, a package of books for Mrs. Henderson, who always offered him a glass of lemonade, a set of golf clubs for Mr. Patel, who chatted enthusiastically about his upcoming retirement, several small parcels for businesses just opening for the day. By noon, with Riverdale completed, Marcus stopped at a deli he frequented for lunch, a turkey sandwich and an iced tea, eaten in the van with the doors open to catch what little breeze there was. He called Diane during his break, as he always did. "How's your day going?" she asked. "No complaints," he replied, though his shirt was already sticking to his back from the heat. "Just heading to Oakwood Heights now. Remember what Dr. Phillips said about your blood pressure. Don't let anyone get to you." Marcus smiled at his wife's concern. "I've been dealing with all kinds of people for over 60 years, honey. I know how to keep my cool." After lunch, Marcus headed toward Oakwood Heights, the van's tires humming on the smooth, well-maintained roads. The neighborhood was a stark contrast to Riverdale, large houses set back on manicured lawns, luxury cars in circular driveways, sprinkler systems creating rainbow prisms in the afternoon sun. His first few deliveries in Oakwood went without incident, though he noted how the gardeners and housekeepers working outside some homes gave him understanding nods, a silent acknowledgement of shared experience as service workers in this wealthy enclave. At 2:30, Marcus approached 1487 Maple Avenue, a stately colonial with white columns and perfectly trimmed hedges. The package was small, a jewelry box, according to the label requiring a signature. As he walked up the herringbone brick path to the front door, Marcus noticed an elderly woman watching him through the side window, her expression wary. When he rang the doorbell, she opened the door just wide enough to peer out at him, keeping the security chain engaged. "Yes." Her voice was clipped, suspicious. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I have a delivery for Alina Whitman that requires a signature." Marcus held up his scanner and the small package, maintaining the professional demeanor he had cultivated over years of customer service. The woman, presumably Alina Whitman, did not undo the chain. "I'm not expecting anything." Marcus checked the address on his scanner. "This is 1487 Maple Avenue, correct? I have a package here from Tiffany & Co. for Alina Whitman." At the mention of the prestigious jewelry store, Mrs. Whitman's expression changed slightly. "My son sometimes sends me gifts," she conceded, "but I don't open the door to strangers. I understand your concern for safety, ma'am. I'm with National Delivery Service." Marcus pointed to his uniform, the logo clearly visible on his shirt and cap. "The package requires your signature. I can leave it on the porch if you prefer, but company policy requires that I see you take possession of it." Mrs. Whitman's eyes narrowed. "How do I know that's really a delivery uniform?" "Anyone can buy a shirt like that." Marcus kept his voice even, though he felt a familiar tension building in his shoulders. "You can call NDS to verify if you'd like. The customer service number is on the delivery notice." "I've been reading about these scams in the newspaper," Mrs. Whitman continued, her voice rising. "People pretending to be delivery men to get into homes. I wasn't born yesterday, you know." "Ma'am, I assure you this is a legitimate delivery." "If you're uncomfortable, perhaps a neighbor could be present while you accept the package." Mrs. Whitman ignored his suggestion. "I've seen your van driving up and down this street several times this week, checking which houses are empty during the day, I suppose?" The accusation stung, but Marcus had heard variations of it before. "Ma'am, I deliver to this neighborhood every week. Different streets on different days. I'm just doing my job." "Well, I don't like the way you were looking at all the houses." "I've lived in this neighborhood for 40 years, and we look out for each other here." Marcus took a slow, measured breath. "Mrs. Whitman, I need to deliver this package and get your signature. If you're unwilling to accept it, I'll have to take it back to the distribution center, and you'll need to pick it up there or reschedule delivery." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because after a moment of consideration, Mrs. Whitman reluctantly closed the door, unhooked the chain, and opened it again, though still only partially. "I'll sign for it, but I want to see some identification first." Marcus produced his NDS employee ID, which Mrs. Whitman scrutinized as if it were written in hieroglyphics. Finally, she extended her hand for the scanner. As she awkwardly attempted to sign on the screen, the device slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the porch. "Oh!" she exclaimed, startled by the noise. Marcus bent to retrieve the scanner, checking it quickly for damage. "It's all right, these things are pretty sturdy." But when he straightened up, Mrs. Whitman had retreated inside her house, the door now firmly shut. "Mrs. Whitman," he called, "I still need your signature." "Go away," came her muffled voice through the door. "I've pressed my emergency button." "The police are on their way." Marcus stood there, bewildered by the sudden escalation. "Mrs. Whitman, there's been a misunderstanding. I'm just trying to deliver your package." No response came from inside. With a sigh, Marcus returned to his van, placing the undelivered package on the passenger seat. He would report the failed delivery and move on to his next stop. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened, and he'd learned long ago not to let such encounters ruin his day. But as he started the engine, he noticed a police cruiser turning onto Maple Avenue, moving slowly as if searching for an address. Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Should he drive away? No, that might look suspicious. Better to stay put and explain the situation. The cruiser pulled up behind his delivery van, and two officers emerged, one older white man with a weathered face and a younger Latino officer who looked fresh out of the academy. Marcus rolled down his window as they approached, keeping his hands visible on the steering wheel, a habit formed from decades of being a black man in America. "Afternoon, officers," he said calmly. The older officer, whose nameplate read Reynolds, spoke first. "We got a call about a suspicious person at 1487 Maple. Can I see some identification, sir?" Marcus nodded, reaching slowly for his wallet. "I'm a delivery driver for National Delivery Service. I was attempting to deliver a package to Mrs. Whitman, but there was a misunderstanding." Officer Reynolds examined Marcus's driver's license and NDS ID while his partner, Officer Diaz, walked around the van, peering through the windows at the packages inside. "What kind of misunderstanding?" Reynolds asked. "Mrs. Whitman seemed concerned about security. When I asked her to sign for her package, she dropped the scanner. I bent to pick it up and she shut the door, saying she'd called the police." Reynolds handed back Marcus's identification. "We've had reports of delivery scams in the area, people posing as delivery drivers to case houses or worse." "I understand the concern," Marcus replied, "but I've been with NDS for 7 years and I've been delivering to this neighborhood regularly." Officer Diaz rejoined them. "Everything looks in order, Mike. Regular delivery van, packages all labeled." Reynolds nodded. "Mr. Johnson, if you don't mind waiting here, I'll go speak with Mrs. Whitman to clear this up." "Of course," Marcus agreed, though he glanced at his watch, thinking of the remaining deliveries on his route and his promise to be home by 4:30. As Reynolds walked toward the house, Officer Diaz remained by the van. The young officer shifted uncomfortably, perhaps sensing the absurdity of the situation. "Been with NDS long?" Diaz asked, attempting conversation. 7 years, Marcus replied. "After I retired from teaching." "Teaching? What subject?" "American history, 30 years at Westfield High." Diaz's expression brightened. "No kidding, I graduated from Westfield in 2010. Did you know Mr. Ramirez? He was the baseball coach." The tension in Marcus's shoulders eased slightly. "Carlos, sure, we shared lunch duty for years. Good man." They continued chatting, discovering other shared connections, until Officer Reynolds returned from the house, looking slightly exasperated. "Mrs. Whitman says she doesn't want the package delivered today. She'll call the company to reschedule or pick it up herself." Marcus nodded. "That's fine, I'll mark it in the system." "Sorry for the inconvenience, Mr. Johnson," Reynolds added, his tone more respectful now. "You're free to go." As the officers returned to their cruiser, Marcus entered the delivery exception into his scanner. The incident had cost him nearly 30 minutes, and he still had a dozen packages to deliver. He would have to hurry to finish his route on time. The next few deliveries went smoothly, though Marcus found himself replaying the encounter with Mrs. Whitman in his mind. It wasn't just the accusation that bothered him, it was the automatic assumption of ill intent, the way his uniform and ID hadn't been enough to overcome her suspicion of his skin color. At his 4th stop after the Whitman house, Marcus delivered a package to an older gentleman who was working in his garden. The man, white-haired and deeply tanned from outdoor work, thanked Marcus and then hesitated. "Say, aren't you Marcus Johnson? Used to teach history at Westfield High?" Surprised, Marcus looked more closely at the man. "Yes, that's right." The gardener grinned, extending a soil-covered hand which he quickly wiped on his pants before offering it to Marcus. "Thomas Reed. My daughter Caroline was in your AP US History class of '96. She never stopped talking about how your class changed her perspective on American history. She's a professor at Georgetown now." The name clicked into place. Caroline Reed, brilliant student, wrote that outstanding paper on the civil rights movement and economic justice. That's her, Thomas beamed with fatherly pride. She still mentions you when she talks about what inspired her career path. The encounter lifted Marcus's spirits as he continued his route. This was one of the unexpected joys of his delivery job, occasionally running into former students or their parents, hearing how they were doing, what they'd accomplished. It reminded him that his decades in the classroom had mattered, had shaped lives in ways he couldn't always see. By 4:15, Marcus had delivered all but one package, a large envelope addressed to Dr. Robert Whitman at 1583 Maple Avenue. The name caught his attention immediately. Whitman wasn't an uncommon surname, but on the same street as his earlier unpleasant encounter, it seemed too coincidental. The house at 1583 was newer than its neighbors, with contemporary architecture and large windows. As Marcus approached the front door, package in hand, he tried to dismiss the connection his mind was making. Surely this Dr. Whitman couldn't be related to the woman who had called the police on him just hours earlier. He rang the doorbell, hearing it chime melodiously inside the house. A moment later, the door was opened by a man in his mid-40s, dressed in casual business attire khakis and a blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. "Dr. Whitman," Marcus confirmed, holding out his scanner. "I have a delivery for you." The man nodded, reaching for the scanner. "That's me. Thanks for bringing it by." As Dr. Whitman signed, Marcus couldn't help but study his face, looking for any resemblance to the elderly woman from earlier. There was something familiar about him, but not in relation to Mrs. Whitman. Dr. Whitman handed back the scanner and accepted the package, then paused, looking at Marcus more carefully. "Excuse me, but you look very familiar. Have we met before?" Marcus shook his head. "I don't think so. I deliver to this neighborhood regularly, though." Dr. Whitman continued to study him. "No, it's something else. Where did you work before delivering packages?" "I was a history teacher at Westfield High for 30 years, retired in 2015. Dr. Whitman's face lit up with recognition. "Mr. Johnson, you were my AP US history teacher, class of '97. The connection clicked into place for Marcus as well. "Robert Whitman, front row, left side of the classroom. You wrote that thoughtful paper comparing the New Deal to modern economic policies." "That's right." Dr. Whitman seemed delighted to be remembered. "I can't believe you recall that after all these years and all those students." "You made an impression," Marcus said honestly. "Not many high school students tackled economic theory with such nuance." Dr. Whitman shook his head, smiling. "Your class made an impression on me. It's partly why I went into public policy research. I'm at the university now, heading up the Urban Development Institute." "That's wonderful to hear," Marcus said sincerely. "It's always special to learn what former students have accomplished. Would you have a few minutes to catch up? I'd love to hear what you've been doing since retirement, and I've got some cold drinks inside." Marcus checked his watch. He was done with his deliveries, and it was only 4:20. He could spare a few minutes and still make it home in time to prepare for dinner at Tanya's. "I'd like that," he said. Dr. Whitman led him into a spacious, tastefully decorated living room with large windows overlooking a backyard garden. "Have a seat. Water, iced tea, or something stronger?" "Iced tea would be great, thank you." While Dr. Whitman went to the kitchen, Marcus took in the room bookshelves filled with academic texts, framed diplomas and awards on one wall, and family photos on another. His eye was drawn to a larger portrait of what appeared to be Dr. Whitman with an elderly couple at his university graduation. The woman in the photo was unmistakably a younger version of Mrs. Whitman from 1487 Maple. Dr. Whitman returned with 2 glasses of iced tea, following Marcus's gaze to the family portrait. "That's from my PhD graduation," he explained, handing Marcus a glass. "My parents were so proud that day." Marcus took the tea, his mind working through the implications. "Your mother, does she live nearby?" "Yes, just down the street. My father passed 5 years ago, and I moved to the neighborhood partly to be closer to her. She's getting older, and while she's still independent, I like being nearby." Dr. Whitman tilted his head, curious. "Do you know her?" Marcus hesitated, unsure how to navigate this unexpected connection. "I may have met her earlier today. I had a delivery for Alina Whitman at 1487 Maple." Dr. Whitman's expression shifted subtly, a flicker of concern crossing his features. "Ah, I hope that went smoothly. My mother can be set in her ways." The diplomatic phrasing told Marcus that Dr. Whitman was well aware of his mother's prejudices, an uncomfortable knowledge carried by many progressive children of older generations. "There was a misunderstanding," Marcus said carefully. She seemed concerned about security. Dr. Whitman sighed, setting down his glass. I apologize if she made you uncomfortable. My mother grew up in a different era with certain perspectives that I've spent much of my adult life trying to help her reconcile. The understated acknowledgement hung in the air between them, teacher and former student, now both older men navigating the complex terrain of race and generational attitudes. No apology necessary, Marcus assured him. We all have our journeys. Dr. Whitman seemed relieved by Marcus's graciousness. You know, it's interesting you delivered to her today. I actually bought her that package. It's a pendant for her birthday next week. He smiled wryly. And now here you are, my former teacher who had such an impact on my thinking about social justice, delivering gifts to my mother who, well, is still working on those lessons. Life has a way of creating these full circles, Marcus observed. It certainly does. Dr. Whitman leaned forward. Mr. Johnson, would you be willing to come with me to visit my mother? I think it would be meaningful for her to meet you properly, not as a delivery driver she's suspicious of, but as the teacher who helped shape her son's worldview. The request surprised Marcus. I'm not sure that would be comfortable for either of us. I understand your hesitation, but my mother isn't a bad person. She's a product of her generation and limited exposure. Meeting you, hearing about our connection, it might help her see beyond her preconceptions. Marcus considered the proposal. He had plans with his family that evening, but this unexpected opportunity felt significant somehow. Let me call my wife, he decided. If I can adjust our evening plans slightly, I'd be willing to join you. Diane, always perceptive, heard something important in his voice when he called. Of course you should go, she said after he explained the situation. We can push dinner back an hour. Tanya will understand. With that settled, Marcus found himself sitting in Dr. Whitman's Tesla, driving the short distance back to 1487 Maple Avenue. Dr. Whitman had called ahead, telling his mother only that he was bringing someone she should meet. She's intrigued, he told Marcus as they pulled into the driveway. She loves surprises, well, pleasant ones anyway. Marcus felt a strange nervousness as they approached the same door he had stood before hours earlier. The same herringbone brick path, the same perfectly trimmed hedges, but the context entirely transformed. Dr. Whitman used his key to open the front door. Mom, it's me. I've brought someone special to meet you. They stepped into a foyer decorated with antique furniture and traditional artwork. The house smelled of furniture polish and the faint scent of roses. In the living room, dear, called a voice Marcus recognized immediately. They found Mrs. Whitman seated in a wingback chair, her silver hair neatly coiffed, wearing a powder blue cardigan despite the summer heat. The air conditioning kept the room cool enough to justify the extra layer. Mom, I'd like you to meet. Mrs. Whitman's eyes widened as she recognized Marcus, her hand flying to her throat in surprise. You're that delivery man from earlier. Dr. Whitman looked between them, his expression calm but firm. Mom, this is Marcus Johnson. He was my high school history teacher, the one I've told you about so many times, the teacher who inspired me to pursue public policy and social justice work. Confusion played across Mrs. Whitman's face as she struggled to reconcile the delivery driver she had treated with suspicion and the educator her son had spoken of with such admiration. But he was at our door earlier trying to deliver something. Yes, Mom. He works for a delivery service now after retiring from 30 years of teaching. He was bringing you the birthday gift I ordered for you from Tiffany's. Mrs. Whitman looked stricken, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment as the implications of her earlier behavior sank in. I didn't know, she stammered. How could you have known? Marcus said gently, breaking his silence. We hadn't met before today, but I assumed. Mrs. Whitman couldn't finish the sentence, the admission of her prejudice hovering unspoken in the air. Dr. Whitman sat on the arm of his mother's chair, placing a hand on her shoulder. Mom, Mr. Johnson was one of the most influential people in my life. His class on American history opened my eyes to perspectives I'd never considered before. Remember all those dinner table debates we used to have when I was in college? A lot of those ideas started in his classroom. Mrs. Whitman looked up at Marcus, really seeing him for the first time. Robert has spoken of you so often over the years. My history teacher says this, or Mr. Johnson would explain it this way. I just never imagined. That Mr. Johnson was black, Dr. Whitman finished gently. Mrs. Whitman nodded, her discomfort evident but her honesty commendable. Marcus decided to extend an olive branch. Dr. Whitman, Robert was an exceptional student. Thoughtful, curious, willing to question his own assumptions. That's rare at any age, but especially in high school. Please, sit down, Mrs. Whitman said, gesturing to the sofa across from her. I owe you an apology, Mr. Johnson. Marcus took a seat, accepting the invitation for what it was, an opportunity for growth. I appreciate that, Mrs. Whitman, but what I'd appreciate even more is a chance for us to get to know each other as people beyond first impressions. And so they talked. Mrs. Whitman shared stories of Robert's childhood, his excited dinner table recountings of Mr. Johnson's classes. Marcus spoke of his 30 years in education, the thousands of students who had passed through his classroom, and his second career in delivery that kept him connected to the community. Gradually, Mrs. Whitman relaxed, her initial embarrassment giving way to genuine interest. She was, Marcus realized, not so much malicious as isolated, a widow living alone, her worldview shaped by limited exposure and media narratives about crime and safety. When Marcus mentioned his wife, Diane, and their family dinner that evening, Mrs. Whitman insisted that Robert retrieve the Tiffany package from his car. "I'd like to properly accept my delivery now," she said with a small smile. "With a signature and everything." As Marcus prepared to leave, having spent nearly an hour in conversation, Mrs. Whitman walked him to the door, her posture more open than before. "Mr. Johnson, I behaved badly today. I made assumptions that were unfair and unkind." "We all make mistakes, Mrs. Whitman. What matters is how we respond when we recognize them." She nodded thoughtfully. "Would you and your wife consider joining Robert and me for dinner sometime? I make a decent pot roast, or so my son tells me." The invitation surprised Marcus, but he found himself smiling. "We'd be honored, though I should warn you my wife will have lots of embarrassing stories about my teaching days. She's heard them all over dinner for 30 years. "I look forward to it," Mrs. Whitman said, and Marcus believed she meant it. As Marcus and Robert walked back to the car, the younger man shook his head in amazement. "I've been trying to broaden my mother's perspective for years. You accomplished more in an hour than I have in a decade." "Sometimes the messenger matters as much as the message," Marcus observed. "She loves you, so she's defensive when you push her to change. I'm a neutral party and a living contradiction to her stereotypes." "Will you really come to dinner?" Robert asked. "We will. Change happens through connection, not confrontation. Your mother took a brave step today, admitting she was wrong. That deserves to be acknowledged." As Robert drove Marcus back to his delivery van, they passed Thomas Reed still working in his garden. The older man waved, and Marcus waved back, thinking about the interconnected nature of community, how his former students were now part of his life in unexpected ways, how a misunderstanding could transform into an opportunity for growth. When Marcus finally arrived home, later than planned but with an extraordinary story to share, Diane listened with her characteristic attentiveness. "So we're having dinner with Mrs. Whitman soon?" she confirmed as they prepared to leave for Tanya's. "If you're comfortable with it," Marcus said. "I think it could be the beginning of something important." Diane squeezed his hand. "I've watched you build bridges in the classroom for 30 years, Marcus Johnson. Why should retirement change that aspect of who you are?" At their daughter's house that evening, surrounded by family, Marcus shared the day's events, carefully framing it as a story of connection rather than conflict. His granddaughter Maya, Tanya's precocious 10-year-old, had the most insightful response. "So the lady was afraid of you because she didn't know you, but now she's not afraid because she knows your grandpa." "Something like that," Marcus agreed. "That's silly," Maya declared with the straightforward logic of childhood. "People are just people until you know their story." The adults exchanged glances, amused and touched by her simplicity. "Out of the mouths of babes," Tanya said, raising her glass in a small toast to her father. "To Marcus Johnson, still teaching important lessons, whether in a classroom or on a delivery route." Marcus smiled, thinking of Mrs. Whitman's face when she realized who he was, of Robert Whitman's pride in introducing his former teacher, of the small but significant shift that had occurred that afternoon. One conversation wouldn't erase decades of ingrained prejudice. One connection wouldn't solve systemic inequality. But it was a start, a reminder that change happens person by person, story by story, connection by connection. And for today, that was enough. If you're enjoying this story, please consider subscribing to hear more stories like this. In the weeks that followed, Marcus continued his delivery routes, including Oakwood Heights. Word traveled in the wealthy neighborhood, as it tends to do in such communities, and he noticed subtle changes in how some residents interacted with him. An elderly man who had previously watched him suspiciously from a window now offered a tentative wave. A woman who had always insisted on checking his ID twice now greeted him by name. Small changes, but meaningful ones. The dinner at Mrs. Whitman's home took place on a cool evening in early September. Diane had been apprehensive at first, concerned that the event might prove uncomfortable or performative. But Alina Whitman surprised them both with her genuine effort to make them welcome, serving her promised pot roast on her best china and asking thoughtful questions about their family and careers. "I understand your daughter is a lawyer," Mrs. Whitman said as they enjoyed coffee and apple pie in her formal dining room. "Robert mentioned she specializes in education law." "That's right," Diane confirmed. Tanya works primarily with families of special needs children, helping them navigate the school system to ensure their kids get proper accommodations. "Important work," Robert commented. "The system can be overwhelming for parents without legal expertise." Mrs. Whitman seemed to hesitate before speaking again. "I was a school secretary for 35 years at Lakeside Elementary. I saw how difficult it was for some parents to advocate for their children." This was new information to Marcus. "You worked in education too. Robert never mentioned that." "It wasn't a prestigious position," Mrs. Whitman said with a small shrug. "Not like teaching or administration, but I took pride in keeping things running smoothly." "School secretaries are the backbone of any educational institution," Marcus said sincerely. "I've never met an effective principal who didn't rely heavily on their secretary." Mrs. Whitman seemed pleased by this acknowledgement. "That's kind of you to say. I retired 15 years ago now, but I still dream about that office sometimes. The constant phone calls, the parade of children with stomach aches or forgotten lunches." As the evening progressed, Marcus observed how Mrs. Whitman gradually relaxed, revealing more of herself beyond the defensive, fearful woman he had first encountered. She shared stories of her late husband, an accountant who had meticulously planned for her financial security, but whose absence still left a void in her life. She spoke of her volunteer work at the local library, organizing their annual book sale. And most tellingly, she asked genuine questions about Marcus and Diane's lives, experiences, and perspectives. "The neighborhood has changed so much since we moved here in 1979, Mrs. Whitman remarked as Robert refilled their coffee cups. "It used to be mostly families with young children. Now it's either older folks like me or younger professionals like Robert." "Communities are always evolving," Marcus observed. "My neighborhood in Westfield has gone through similar transitions over the decades." "Westfield," Mrs. Whitman repeated thoughtfully. "That's near Grantwood, isn't it? Where those new condominiums are being built?" "That's right. There's been quite a bit of development in that area lately. I read something about those condos in the newspaper, concerns about whether they'll affect property values in surrounding neighborhoods." Mrs. Whitman's tone was conversational, but Marcus noted the potential subtext. "Property values have been a convenient proxy for other concerns throughout American housing history," he replied carefully, "often masking more uncomfortable conversations about who belongs where." Rather than becoming defensive, Mrs. Whitman nodded slowly. "Robert has said similar things. I grew up being taught that certain neighborhoods were good and others weren't, without much examination of what made them so. Those classifications rarely happened by accident," Robert added. "As my research at the Urban Development Institute has shown repeatedly, housing patterns in our city and across America were deliberately shaped by discriminatory policies." Mrs. Whitman turned to Marcus and Diane. "I imagine you've experienced that firsthand." The direct acknowledgement of racial dynamics surprised Marcus. "We have," he confirmed. "When we bought our home in 1985, there were still neighborhoods where realtors wouldn't show us houses, regardless of our qualifications. I remember Robert coming home from your class, Mr. Johnson, talking about redlining and housing covenants, things I'd never heard discussed openly before. It was uncomfortable for me at first. Learning history often is," Marcus said, "especially when it challenges narratives we've accepted without question." Mrs. Whitman looked at her son with evident pride. "Robert took those uncomfortable lessons and built a career around addressing them. I didn't always understand his choices. I thought he should have gone into medicine or law for a secure future, but I see now the importance of the work he does." The conversation continued to weave between personal reminiscence and broader social observations, never confrontational but not shying away from substantive topics either. By the time Marcus and Diane prepared to leave, the atmosphere had transformed from the polite formality of their arrival to something approaching genuine warmth. At the door, Mrs. Whitman surprised Diane with a careful hug and handed Marcus a small wrapped package. "Just a token of appreciation," she explained, "for your patience with an old woman set in her ways." Later, in the privacy of their car, Marcus unwrapped the gift, a vintage fountain pen in a velvet case. "There's a note," Diane pointed out, finding a small card tucked into the case. The handwritten message read, For the teacher who never stopped teaching and the delivery man who delivered more than packages. With gratitude, Alina Whitman. Marcus ran his fingers over the elegant pen, thinking about the day's delivery route, the packages he had distributed across the city, objects passing from person to person, connecting lives in ways both mundane and profound. "What are you thinking?" Diane asked, noting his contemplative expression. "I'm thinking about how we deliver things to each other all the time, beyond physical packages. Lessons, perspectives, second chances." Diane squeezed his hand. "You've always been a natural deliverman then?" 2 months later, Marcus was working his regular Saturday morning shift when Sarah Chen approached him in the distribution center, holding a clipboard with the day's route assignments. "Mr. Johnson, I've got something different for you today. We're starting a new community outreach program, Delivery Drivers in the Classroom. The idea is to have our drivers visit schools to talk about logistics, transportation networks, and career paths. The first session is next Friday at Lakeside Elementary. I immediately thought of you with your teaching background." Marcus accepted the information packet Sarah handed him, intrigued by the concept. "Sounds interesting. Why Lakeside to start?" "They reached out to us, actually." Apparently, one of their longtime former employees suggested the program. And Alina Whitman. The name stopped Marcus mid-motion. "Alina Whitman contacted NDS about this program?" Sarah nodded. "She's on the school's alumni committee now. Said she thought it would be valuable for students to learn about the infrastructure that supports their community, especially from people with diverse career experiences." Marcus smiled, thinking of the complex journey that had led to this moment, from a tense encounter on a front porch to a dinner conversation to this unexpected connection. "I'd be happy to participate," he told Sarah. "Very happy indeed." The following Friday found Marcus standing before a classroom of fourth graders at Lakeside Elementary, wearing his NDS uniform but speaking with the confidence of his 30 years in education. The children sat cross-legged on a colorful rug, faces upturned with curiosity as he explained how packages traveled from warehouses to their homes. In the back of the classroom stood Alina Whitman, her silver hair styled the same as always, but her expression entirely transformed from their first meeting, open, supportive, engaged. Beside her was her son Robert, who had taken time from his university schedule to attend the presentation. "Who can tell me why delivery services are important to a community?" Marcus asked the class, hands shot up eagerly. He called on a small girl with braided hair and bright eyes. "Because they bring us things we need when we can't go get them ourselves," she answered confidently. "That's exactly right," Marcus affirmed. "We're connectors, bringing necessities, gifts, opportunities from one place to another, from one person to another." As he continued his presentation, showing the students his scanner and explaining the complex logistics of modern delivery systems, Marcus caught Alina's eye across the room. She gave him a small nod of acknowledgement, not just of his skillful engagement with the children, but of the larger journey they had taken together. After the presentation, as the children filed out for recess, Robert approached Marcus with an unexpected proposal. The Urban Development Institute is launching a new initiative on community interconnectedness, examining how services like delivery, public transportation, and utilities either bridge or reinforce neighborhood divisions. We're looking for advisors with practical experience. Would you be interested? Marcus considered the offer. "I'm not an academic, Robert. That's precisely why we need your perspective. Too often, policy research happens in isolation from lived experience. Your insights from both education and delivery work would be invaluable." Alina joined them, adding her own encouragement. "You should consider it, Mr. Johnson. Roberts Institute does important work and they need voices like yours." The irony wasn't lost on Marcus, that this woman who had once viewed him with suspicion was now advocating for his voice to be heard in policy discussions that could shape their city's future. "I'll think about it," Marcus promised. "Though I'd need to work around my delivery schedule." "We're flexible," Robert assured him. "And speaking of schedules, I hope you and Diane can join us for Thanksgiving. Mom's hosting this year, and she makes an excellent sweet potato pie." "I'll check with Diane, but I think we'd enjoy that," Marcus replied, still somewhat amazed at how their lives had become intertwined. As they prepared to leave the school, Alina touched Marcus's arm lightly. "I've been meaning to tell you. I've started a neighborhood welcome committee in Oakwood Heights. When new families move in, we deliver a basket of local products and information about community resources." "That sounds wonderful," Marcus said sincerely. "It was your work that inspired it," she admitted. "Watching how you connect with people on your route, even briefly, It made me realize how isolated I'd become after Gerald died. How isolated many of us are in those big houses with our security systems and privacy fences. Before Marcus could respond, a group of children returning from recess swarmed around him, eager to ask more questions about the biggest package he'd ever delivered, and whether he'd ever driven his truck in the snow. He answered them patiently, slipping back into his teacher mode with practiced ease. Elena and Robert watched from a few steps away, the former school secretary and her professor's son observing the natural rapport between Marcus and the children. "You were right about him," Elena said quietly to her son. "He has a gift for teaching. I've been telling you that for years, Mom. Yes, well, sometimes it takes seeing something firsthand to really understand it." She paused, then added, "I'm glad we had that misunderstanding, as uncomfortable as it was at the time." "Are you actually grateful that you called the police on my former teacher?" Robert asked, his tone gently teasing. Elena's cheeks colored slightly. "I'm grateful for what came after. The conversations, the connections, the chance to reconsider certain perspectives." On the drive back to the NDS distribution center, Marcus called Diane to share the events of the morning and the Thanksgiving invitation. "So we're spending Thanksgiving with the Whitmans now?" Diane marveled. "Life takes some unexpected turns, doesn't it?" "It certainly does," Marcus agreed, thinking of how a routine delivery on a hot summer day had cascaded into something none of them could have anticipated. "Elena's changed quite a bit since that first encounter. People can surprise you when given the chance," Diane observed. "Not always, but often enough to keep trying." Marcus thought about the diverse neighborhood where he'd grown up in the 1960s and 70s, the integrated but still unequal schools he'd attended, the subtle and not-so-subtle barriers he'd navigated throughout his career. He thought about the thousands of students he'd taught over 3 decades, hoping to broaden their understanding of American history, its complexities, its contradictions, its ongoing evolution. And he thought about Elena Whitman, who at 75 was still capable of growth and change, still open to revising the narrative she had lived by for most of her life. "One delivery at a time," he said, more to himself than to Diane. "What's that, honey?" "Just thinking about how change happens. Not all at once, but incrementally. One conversation, one connection, one delivery at a time." As he pulled into the NDS parking lot to complete his shift, Marcus noticed Sarah waving to him from the doorway of the distribution center, likely with more packages for him to deliver that afternoon. More connections to make, more opportunities to bridge the distances between people and communities. He waved back, ready for whatever deliveries came next. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.